So Professor Richard Thompson OBE has been studying causes and impacts of marine litter for more than 2 decades. He was the first scientist to coin the use of the term microplastics to describe microscopic fragments of debris. And he's been involved in key discoveries and contributed to UK government legislation around the charging for plastic bags, the levy, the ban on microbeads in cosmetics, just being a couple. He's advised the European Commission and the United Nations Environment Programme and works to improve environmental practices within the European plastics industry. He was recently presented with an OBE for services to marine science. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Richard Thompson of Plymouth University.
Well, thank you very much, Lucy. I'm absolutely staggered and amazed and really pleased to be here. I mean, I have been working on plastics for over 25 years. When I first started to train to be a marine biologist, I thought it was going to be the stuff that Hanley was talking about. I thought it was going to be getting belly to belly with marine creatures. That's what drew me to the topic. But I soon realized that every habitat I started to study actually had plastic in it. And that drew me in deeper and deeper, trying to understand where the heck was it all coming from and what could we do to try to prevent it. After 25 years, I'm now moving increasingly more towards crawling out of the sea and moving onto the land, because of course the sea hasn't made this problem. The sea is where we're seeing this kind of gaping wound of the accumulation of our end-of-life plastic. But the solution to it all, as we've heard so excellently delivered by many of the speakers this morning, is back on the land. It's where we humans live. It's not a problem made in the sea. If we look at all the litter that's in the oceans, let's be very clear, 75% of what we find is plastic. And I think a focus on plastic is absolutely justified. We now find plastic on every shoreline that we visit. We also find it if we take a deep sea submersible down to a place never before visited by humans. We find our rubbish has beaten us there. And in some places, it's beaten us there in quantities far greater than we find in surface water concentrations, the garbage patches, those surface water gyres. The litter now contaminates our deep sea habitats. Now, it's important to recognise that this litter isn't one thing. We talk about plastics as though it's one thing we can ban from a supermarket aisle. It's a very, very heterogeneous assemblage of materials, from large items of mega debris like the tail cone of a European Space Agency rocket. Only one of those have I found in 25 years of study. At the other end of the scale, what's now very clearly the most numerous stuff is the microplastics, pieces that go smaller than the diameter of a human hair, that now contaminate beach sediments on a global scale, that are present in birds and fish, that are present in Arctic sea ice, and right down to the sediments of the deep ocean. Now, whatever your perspective, I think there's now broad agreement that plastic in the environment can be harmful. It's clear that in the UK it costs us millions of pounds every year just to keep the places we care about free from plastic, the ports and harbours, the tourist beaches. 17 million or more every year we're spending on that. Now, as you'll see and have seen already this morning, this, in my view, is a totally avoidable problem. I would far rather that 17 million was spent on hospitals, on schools, on infrastructure, than on cleaning up a few places just to keep them free of litter, when actually what we really want to see is a litter-free ocean. It's very clear that this litter presents hazards that can result at one end of the scale in loss of life. At the other end of the scale, the work that we've done with psychologists at the University of Plymouth show that even very small quantities of plastic in the ocean depress what we call the restorative value. We go to the seaside, it makes us feel good. Even a few discrete plastic bottles and crisp packets depress that restorative value of a visit to the seaside. Most of us get very concerned, of course, and rightly so, me as a marine biologist equally so, about the effects of encounters with wildlife. Over 700 species now documented to encounter litter. Most of those encounters are with plastic litter. In fact, 90+% of them are encounters with plastic. And many of those species are already threatened or endangered. Many of the species that are ingesting plastic are also species that are of commercial importance to us, whether it's fish or shellfish. And it's also very clear that unless we choose to do something about it, the estimates indicate that by 2025, we'll have 3 times as much litter in the oceans as we did in 2015. So it's really clear to me that we need to take action. At the same time, plastics bring numerous societal benefits. We can't banish plastics from our lives entirely. Plastics are lightweight, versatile, highly durable and inexpensive materials that actually have the potential to reduce our footprint on the planet, whether that's lightweight parts in cars or packaging that reduces food waste. There are many societal benefits that come directly from our use of plastics. So the challenge then really is to actually try to harness those benefits without the unintended consequences, without the side effects of the accumulation of plastic in the environment. And if you think about the benefits of plastic, you think about the uses of plastic, whatever they may be, even the litter that's accumulated on the shore, think back to where it came from. Most of those benefits, if not nearly all of them, can actually be achieved without the need for this emission to the environment. It's a very different environmental problem to many of the challenges that face our oceans. In most cases, the challenge to our oceans, whether it's taking fish out to eat or whether it's wanting to build infrastructure, to build homes and holiday homes and hotels on the coastline, which takes away natural habitat, the thing us humans want is normally directly coupled to the damage to the environment. The same with the emissions from an aeroplane taking a long-haul flight. But if you think about the benefits of plastic, virtually all of those could be achieved without the environmental damage. So whilst it's really important that we think about using less plastic, it's also important to think about how can we use plastics more responsibly, because it is possible to get the benefits of plastic without those unintended side effects. Why are we in the pickle that we're in? Well, part of the problem is that actually for all of my lifetime and for most of the audience here, we've been trained to regard our interaction with plastic as being one of something that helps us to have a more disposable, what we call a throwaway society. The majority of all the plastics we produce, and we're making 300 million tons of plastic globally every year, 40% of that is going into single-use products, the packaging that we heard about earlier. Things that we regard as being disposable without really a care for what end of life looks like, where they are disposed to. This picture is from the center pages of Time Life magazine in the 1950s. The whole of that article is about the benefits that throwaway living, fueled by plastic products that are inexpensive, can bring to society. Now, in 1950, we were making less than 5 million tons of plastic globally. Today, we're producing over 300 million tons. And the majority is single use, a very short life in service, a very long persistence as waste. And actually, the word waste is really important here, because I think that the litter in the sea, which is the topic that's brought us here today, is actually really a symptom of a much wider problem. It's a symptom of a systemic failure in the way we're using non-renewable oil and gas via short-lived applications to waste. The stuff in the sea is the very visible wound, but it isn't necessarily any better if we're burying it beneath the ground or burning it. Most of the litter that we find on shorelines is related to single-use applications. So I've said that plastics is a really important part of marine litter. Single-use packaging is a really important part of the plastic story there. And I think it's justifiable to have a focus on single-use packaging because it's got this really short life, but a long persistence of waste. But wherein the challenge lies now, because I think we're all agreed that there's a problem, it's on matching specific uses of plastic to specific solutions that will help to reduce the challenges in the future. There'll certainly be some things where material reduction, where maybe stopping using plastic and moving towards a plastic-free aisle that we heard about from Richard earlier on will be the answer. But there are also applications where plastic is probably the best material to do the job. So how do we therefore use plastic more responsibly? 8% of world oil production going into making plastics. If we can take that carbon source at the end of the plastic product's life and get the carbon to move around in a more circular way, that will reduce our reliance on the use of fossil oil and gas. It will also reduce the quantity of waste we're generating, whether that's waste accumulating in landfill, in managed systems, or going to incineration, or waste escaping as litter to the environment. Greater circularity of the cases where we need to use plastics, where it's the best material for the job, will really help to reduce the escape to the environment. And there's immense synergy here, of course, with the problems of waste management on land. So it is about tackling solutions to plastic in the ocean. But if we can achieve that, I think there's an opportunity there for us to achieve a much more systemic change in reducing the quantity of plastic that goes to waste. And it's absolutely true, going right back to the start of the talks this morning and echoed by many of them, the fundamental change needs to start from the design stage. And here are just 3 examples of that. The microbeads and cosmetics. This is work from PhD student Imogen, who's here in the audience. These are the microbeads, 3 million of them, from the single container for gents. Nothing you could do as a consumer to take those to be recycled. Inevitably, they would pass down the wastewater treatment system. Okay, we now have legislation to address that, but the patent on these was filed 50 years ago. Has nobody at the design stage ever asked the question, where are they going? The step really has to be from the design stage. The fibres from textiles. Again, work by Imogen a few years ago, 2016, about the time that Sophie first called me. We were showing that those 3 garments that you see illustrated at the bottom, some of those garments were releasing 4 to 5 times more fibres in a wash than others. It's indicating that there's something that can be done at the design stage to make those garments last longer and to reduce the emissions. And so I was really delighted when we had a conversation on the phone, and she said, I know exactly why some of this is happening. But the fix is back at the design stage. It's designing products to give life in service and to minimize emissions during that life in service, and ideally to be compatible with circularity at the end of life. The final example I'll give there is the pigments in those 2 bottles. PET bottles, a polymer we've known for decades as being highly recyclable, carries the same logo on it as a clear, transparent PET bottle. If I were to ask a recycler which bottle they would like to have, they would immediately say they wanted only clear PET bottles, if they could, because the clear ones are worth twice as much to them in the recycling stream. They're both recyclable in theory. As the consumer, that's the information you're given. They're both recyclable. But from a point of view of the economic viability, the pigments has hindered the likelihood of recycling at the end of life. But the pigment isn't increasing food security. It's entirely associated with marketing. It's a change that needs to be made at the design stage to help us move towards circularity. Because in some cases, plastic probably will be the best material to use in packaging some of those products. So, in summary, I'd say that it's very clear that marine debris exists. I would say it's actually a symptom. It's a symptom of a wider problem of our rapid linear use of materials to waste. This waste isn't directly coupled to societal benefit. And what I'm saying by that is we could use plastics in a more sustainable way without the need for accumulation in the environment or as waste. It's clear that there's harm. It's also clear that there's synergies, immense synergy to be achieved by moving towards change in terms of using less non-renewable oil and gas as the carbon source and generating less waste. We need to recognise that there isn't any single solution, however, to the problem, and we need to match the solutions to the specific problems. And I would say that's where the challenge, the greatest challenges for us lies at this time. We've got, I would say, all of the ducks aligned. The public are really interested in the problem. Industry is starting to be aligned with the problem. Policymakers are aligned with the problem. We will never be in this space again where everybody is aligned wanting to make a change. I think it was John who said, we don't want people just dipping their toe in the water. The only way to make changes that are effective is to have the proper evidence base to rely on to inform that change. If we take knee-jerk reactions, and I'm already starting to see the slightly headless chicken mode in the heat of the fire running towards solutions, we will spiral off towards the left-hand side of the page, towards unintended consequences. And an illustration of that would be this plastic carrier bag. The world's first degradable plastic carrier bag was going to disappear after 3 years. I've had this one since 2004. It's now degraded as a carrier bag, but what I have is millions of small pieces of microplastic. An unintended consequence. So the way to fix this problem, in my view, is to make sure that we take action, yes, but it needs to be considered appropriate and proportionate action that solves the problem in the environment that we're concerned about, whether that's waste or litter, but that maintains functionality where plastics are the material to be the go-to choice and moves us to a better place. If we can do that, then that will actually help to reinforce a better societal norm, a better engagement with plastics that will equally help to nudge citizens' behaviour towards more appropriate use of plastic. So it needs to start from the design stage, but we need to make sure we take the right decisions, and if we do, that will reinforce the right behaviours. If we jump to take knee-jerk reactions, we could easily see greater food wastage, and we could see unintended consequences of lack of functionality. And if we do take those wrong decisions, and it is principally from an industry point of view, then the consumer will rapidly turn their back on this desire to harness more sustainable use of plastics, and we'll be back where we started from, or maybe in a worse position. So we need the evidence base. Is, I think, absolutely critical to guide us as we're going forward. We know the area where the solutions lie, but the specific pathway from one product to the next is much less clear. Unintended consequences of the degradable carrier bag. So, thank you very much for listening. You'll find some of those examples over on our stand at the back. We're part of what we call the International Marine Litter Research Unit based at Plymouth University. If you Google us, you'll find a lot of the materials I've talked about free to download from our website. So thank you very much indeed.